Okay, I ran into one small problem, which sometimes happens when you're doing this kind of work. There's a capacitor on the board here, and that capacitor, the way it's soldered in the board, the leads are too short. It won't bend over one way or the other. This way it hits the resistor, it won't go over any farther. The other way it hits a diode, so it's up too high and won't allow the board to plug all the way in directly. So what I'm going to have to do is remove this capacitor and either replace it with one just like it with a little bit longer leads so I can lay it over, or extend these leads if it's enough room sticking through the other side of the board. Maybe I can unsolder it and make it just a little bit longer. Doesn't lack much, but it's enough to keep the board from seating properly all the way in the sockets. So just a little setback, but it should be an easy fix. But that's something that you need to look out for, because each one of these boards are slightly different. They use different capacitors sometimes, and they're soldered in a little bit different places. So each board may be slightly different. Okay, I was able to unsolder it and lay it down and still have enough lead to make the solder connection. So I think it's down far enough now to where I can get by with it. Let's try it again and see what it looks like. Okay, not much room to spare, but it looks like a little hard to see there, but it's setting flat now and just barely touching, so I think we'll be okay on that. Okay, next, the wire with the plug on the end that we soldered onto the board, we're going to plug it into the card, and it only goes one way, so just make sure you get the correct way, and we'll just plug it right in. Okay, next thing we need to do is take the 6-pin connector out of the bag with the other wires, and this is it right here, a little short connector. With one end the wires come straight out of it, and the other end the wires twist and change polarity on the end. We want the straight end, and what we're going to do is plug it into the multi-game board right here at P7. So all we do is plug that in, and let's go to the next step. Okay, next step, we're going to take the other end of the wire we just plugged into the board, and we're going to plug it into the wire harness interface board. Okay, this is the wire harness interface board, and here is the plug that we're going to plug the other end, which is the end where the wires are folded over, and we're going to plug it into this plug. Now that we've made sure we got the cable connected in the right direction, the next step is to insert the board onto the G80 board, and we're going to have to align these sockets on the back with the original header pins in the top of the board. Easy to get them started in one end and kind of work your way around and plug them in. Okay, now that we put the header pin board on, the CPU board is now finished, completed. Now we can move on to the next step. Okay, now have the CPU board with the new multi-game installed on it in the card cage along with the XY boards. So now it's time to throw the power on and find out if it's going to boot up. Just go around to the front, take a look at the screen, cross our fingers. And I see nothing. Okay, our last attempt at the installation of the Vector Labs Multigame. When we fired it up, everything was dead. Couldn't get it to work. So I had to go back to do some testing to make sure that something wasn't wrong with the game, the cabinet, the wiring, power supply, whatever. Checked everything over, put a spare CPU Star Trek board in and a spare ROM board along with my XY boards, fired it up, and the game come up and was working fine. So that tells me that there was something wrong with the installation of the new multi-game on my CPU board, because I knew that the XY boards were fine and I still had other boards in the cage. So I got to thinking, I said, well, it seemed like that the MPU wasn't even booting up, and I had installed a brand new Z80 chip that I just got from Bob Roberts. It looks factory fresh. All the pins were straight, all the pins were shiny, and that's what I had installed in the new multi-game. So I said, well, it could be a bad chip. So I pulled it out and I took the chip out of the Clay multi-game, which I knew was good because it was working, installed it in the Vector Labs multi-game card, put it back in, fired it up, and guess what? We now have a working multi-game. Well, not quite. The CPU is running with the XY boards. Nothing else is installed. And you can play the game with the old control panel. No sound, no speech. But the next step, since we now have the CPU working, is to install the new spinner control panel interface board, which, from what my understanding, bypasses the old wires and everything that goes to the control panel. So everything to the control panel will now be through the new ribbon cable, which we have to install next. Which will be this cable here, which will interface between the new interface board and the new multi-game card. Okay, so the next step is to install the new spinner board, and according to the instructions, it is screwed onto the back side of the spinner controller underneath the control panel. Well, it is, because this is what appears to be a dedicated upright. Since mine is in a asteroids conversion, when they converted mine in a conversion kit, the wires come out of this card cage, runs around inside the cabinet, and my spinner control board is screwed to the cabinet itself. So what we'll have to do is disconnect that 15-pin connector and I believe it's a 12-pin straight edge connector. We'll no longer use the 15-pin connector. We'll only use the straight edge connector, which goes to the wiring under the control panel and over to the spinner also. So what I'm going to do is I'll just replace the old with the new and hook the wires up to the control panel, and then we'll see what the next step is. Okay, the new spinner interface board is now installed in the cabinet. Got the tie strap restraint on the ribbon cable so it can't pull on the pins. And now next step, I believe, is to modify the 3 soundboards.